Thank you. Thank you. So, welcome everybody to the Thursday session with Dr. Elliot Cohen of the Eunoia Summit. Um, Please, as you go through, enjoy this, leave some messages, put some emojis, send some fireworks up, whatever it is that works for you. If you've got any questions, pop those into the chat as well. And welcome from us all as ever. So Romy will be passing to her in just a second, and Philip will be there picking up with the questions at the end as he does. So let's move straight on. Romy, over to you, my dear colleague.
Hello and welcome. So this is the third year of the Eunoia Summit, brought to you by the Centre for Spirituality, Ecology and Mental Health. Eunoia is an ancient Greek for something more than goodwill or beautiful thinking. The word captures a sense of honourable reputation, empathy and readiness to help. It emphasises that right speech and right thinking leads to right actions for the good of the community. We are a modest collective of researchers, teachers, and practitioners working together to provide heart-led and centered, low-cost and evidence-based resources to support the spiritual development and spiritual well-being of the community. In times of turmoil, uncertainty, and fear, the most important thing we can do is to come together to build caring and compassionate communities where we can grow together and become wise and more fully step into our courageous, authentic selves. In doing so, we are better able to support each other as well as our planet. These are not new views. They are ancestral threads belonging to the ancient wisdom traditions that are finding more and more support in the scientific research of today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Elliot Cohen, Senior Lecturer at Leeds Beckett University, where he teaches across a variety of psychology disciplines, including but not limited to environmental, peace, parapsychology, is it psychonautics?
It is transpersonal psychology, psychonautics, yes.
Yeah, I love that because my kids used to play Psychonauts.
Yeah, it was a game,
which,
yeah.
which they absolutely love. So I was really excited when I saw that. But also the social psychology of music, which I also love because I think if everything began with sound, then music feels like our home. And so Dr. Cohen has worked in Manchester as both psychotherapist, specializing in psychodrama, drama therapy, music therapy, and mindful-based therapies, as well as being director of Manchester Academy for Transpersonal Studies, running courses on Buddhist, Taoist and Hasidic philosophy after traveling extensively across Far East, studying Taoist, Buddhist and Hindu philosophy. He was made an honorary fellow at Manchester Centre for Jewish Studies, where he'd lectured on multiple religious identities and comparative religion, and has a new book out called The Psychology of Slow Living. So yes, without further ado, I pass the baton to you. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Oh, thank you so much for that introduction. I love that bit about ancestral threads and wisdom traditions, because I think that is very much kind of the roots of the book, where it comes from, and that it's looking to challenge this kind of quick fix approach to changing minds and behaviors that many of us have, the kind of life hack style mind hacks, and looking to kind of establish something more authentic, something deeper, that it's really more about sort of a cultivation rather than kind of an upgrade. So the psychology of slow living in this sense refers to really challenging, looking for alternatives to what I refer to as the pathological pace of modern life. And I base that on, think of every time you ask somebody how they are, they usually say tired, or they usually say sort of exhausted or stressed. It seems chronic, and it seems to be sort of just everywhere. I've referred a few times in book promotions to Auden's poetry, particularly the age of anxiety, that this seems to be the age of anxiety. And so the idea of slow living was something that I sort of discovered some years ago for myself, particularly when I was going through a period of burnout, which required me to leave work for a few months. And that was something of a readjustment, kind of a reset, a reprioritizing. Um, and rediscovering a happier pace of life was actually Routledge's suggestion to make it sound more friendly, more accessible. And that makes sense because the last book I wrote was called The Psychologization of Eastern Spiritual Traditions. And I think it had a subheading like colonization, translation, and commodification or something. And my wife said just the title of that book made her tired. Um, so, it did have a lovely cover though. And this one has a lovely cover. This is actually Guilin in China, which is like walking into an ink painting. It's absolutely stunning. And I remember the first time I saw those mountains and the river, I audibly gasped. It was just so beautiful. It was how I imagine sort of the Buddhist Pure Lands or the Taoist realms of the immortals to look like. And it really felt like I was stepping into that world. So when it came to finding a front cover for this book, I wanted it to be something that encapsulated that sort of harkened back to that Edenic encounter, that sort of glimpse of paradise that I felt when I went to Guilin, and the fact that it seems to be a sort of a sunrise as well. Everything is bathed in gold. I know you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but it's nice if you can. So there we go. I've referred to today's talk as subtitles, sort of like a gentle introduction. The book itself is really kind of a deep dive into several different wisdom traditions and looking at ways that they counter or challenge the pace of living, the speed of living today. I think it's important to start with a little mention of the slow living movement, though, and where this began, and particularly the slow food movement. So I think the next slide, I've done that. And it's really kind of the 1980s in terms of the contemporary slow living movement. It's kind of in the 1980s and in Italy, Carlo Petrini, um, you are what you eat and you are how you eat. And this was particularly in response to a critique of the fast food industry. And Petrini was particularly depressed with the number of fast food franchises that were opening around Italy with such a wonderful sort of culture of food and community. He saw this as like the antithesis of all of that. And there was something about the fast food culture and the fast food mentality. And I explore this at some length in the introduction of the book. I look at things like Italian futurism and modernity and the velocentricity. I refer to it as this obsession, fixation, fetishization of speed. And I'm interested in that expression, you are what you eat. And if we eat with that sort of mentality of speed, what does that do to the food that we eat? And certainly, I think people are a lot more interested in dietetics today and the food we consume and where it comes from and what it does for us. And I've noticed a lot of people are interested now in sort of organic. And I think that move to organic and natural foods and whole foods is very much akin to and related to the sort of the slow food movement and philosophy. Um, I love this quote from Petrini. The quest for slowness, which begins as a simple rebellion against the impoverishment of taste, makes it possible to, does it say regain? I can't see because all our pictures are in the way. Let me move our pictures out of the way so I can actually rediscover, rediscover taste. So the quest for slowness, which begins as a simple rebellion against the impoverishment of taste in our lives, makes it possible to rediscover taste. And there is something, I suppose, a theme that I keep coming back to in the book about reclaiming, recovering, rediscovering not just taste, but a way of being in the world, a way of seeing the world. Um, so this is, I think, sort of a thread that runs through the whole book. Um, so thinking of the pace of our lives, I can't help but notice um, just over the course of being sort of a student and then postgraduate and then sort of lecturing today, just the speed of technological advances and it's a different world. And one of the things that I note a few times, but I try not to fixate on it, was that a lot of people said that during the global epidemic, during COVID, this was going to be a reset. This was going to be an opportunity to slow down, and that everyone was going to have this time to think, to reflect, to prioritize. Um, and what seemed to happen for a lot of people instead was it became a time of great anxiety and feeling disconnected and alienated. It wasn't really this time of slowing down or resetting for a lot of people. The explanation I give in the book is that it wasn't a gradual slowing down, it was an emergency stop and it was a sudden jolt, and people had no time to acclimatize, to prepare. It was just sudden, and people were suddenly alone. A lot of people found themselves alone and cut off from others. And I think although many of us have the fantasy of getting away from everyone and getting away from it all, and many of us have what I refer to almost as like the fantasy of the hermit lifestyle. The reality is very, very different. And something that I often point out to people who do have that kind of hermit fantasy is that certainly for Buddhist hermits and Taoist hermits, the kind that Red Pine or Bill Porter writes about in his books about the hermits, the great hermit tradition of China. This was always the practice of those who were advanced in their practice. You had to be an advanced practitioner before you went off alone to practice as a hermit. This was always the most advanced. This wasn't for beginners, because beginners just don't have the psychological preparation to manage this. And yet a lot of people found themselves in this sort of position of being essentially hermits for many months. How long? I can't remember how long lockdown even lasted for, but it was it was an extended period of time, and we are still dealing with the mental health repercussions of this. There's a fair number of papers that are coming out, clinical psychology journals that are looking at the fallout really of lockdown and the feeling of being alienated or isolated, and how that for many people was a source of anxiety and depression. Um, so on one hand we have that sudden stop, and on the other hand we had this time where we became increasingly dependent on technology. Um, so rather than sort of taking a break, it was almost we became utterly dependent on technology to feel connected, to be updated. And this, I think, was an interesting change as well. I mean, we live in the digital age, but I think that really kind of highlighted our dependence on the digital realm, um, on the virtual realm as well. And it was interesting to me also noting how people used technology at that time and how it became such a central part. I mean, we're all using Zoom, and people might have heard of Zoom fatigue. That during COVID, people just they'd had enough of the technology, and it was interesting in terms of how the pandemic, on one hand, brought our relationship with technology into focus, and I think we're still dealing with these questions. But of course, technology does not slow down, and I have a whole chapter. I think it's the second to last chapter in the book where I look at streams of consciousness, streams of data. I think is the title where I consider the changing nature of human nature. But I'll come back to that later. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I say that essentially our age is this kind of velocentric age, and we are obsessed with speed, efficiency, and productivity. What I refer to as like the kind of the what's the trinity of this age that actually gets worshipped. Now, interestingly, our age, the age of speed, the age of anxiety. One of the early chapters, I look at Hindu thought and cosmology, particularly their theories of time. And the time that we're currently living in, according to Hindu cosmology, is called the Kali Yuga, or the age of darkness. And Gita Mehta, who's a author that I really admire, also says that although it's called the age of darkness, one of its defining characteristics is speed. Now, my earliest introduction to the Kali Yuga was actually through the work of Alan Watts in his book, what was it called? I've forgotten its name now. The Tao of something. The Tao of Philosophy. There we go. It's all there somewhere. And in that book, what upset me was that he was talking about the Kali Yuga, and he said it began on the 23rd of February. And well, that's my birthday. Why does the age of darkness have to begin on my birthday? It felt really unfair. But if we look at the Kali Yuga and how it's described, it's this age of confusion. It's this age where we are very distant from the earlier stages, the Satya Yuga, or the age of truth, the golden age, where time moved slower, where people were more connected to the earth, to the divine, to one another. So the Satya Yuga, the age of truth, that earlier golden age, is that sort of gentler, slower time. And I think it's very interesting that the name is Satya, truth. I talk a lot about this in the chapter, particularly the way that some people refer to our age as the age of post-truth. This is the age of fake news. This is the age of AI and artificial and augmented realities. And I think that's a fascinating convergence. That this is, what the Kali Yuga is all about, and it kind of made me take Hindu cosmology a lot more seriously. So, well, what else are they saying about this age? Now, that the lovely thing about the Hindu philosophy of time, as Watts notes and many swamis also note, is that it's cyclical. That it doesn't end, and that this age will eventually re-emerge into the Satya Yuga, a new Satya Yuga, a new age, new time. Now, when that's all supposed to happen is a matter of debate. Maybe we're on the precipice now. It certainly feels that we are in this age of accelerating change, and this question of what is real, what is authentic, is becoming ever more difficult to ask. It's becoming ever more difficult to even see what's real. And this has real repercussions for things like the study of history and lots of other issues like trusting experts or scientific facts. What does it mean to be in a post-truth age? So this is something that I explore, but I think it's a fascinating way in to look at Hindu cosmology. It becomes a really useful lens. Um, because also when we look to the Upanishads, they're all about drawing closer to the truth, drawing closer to the divine within us and between us, reconnecting. And look at the words, even the word yoga itself. Yoga means sort of connection, union, connection with the divine. So I look at a few thinkers who sort of teach this way of reconnecting, and a large part of that reconnecting is actually learning to take a step back, learning to detach, learning sometimes to disconnect. And so when we look at the technological advances around us that promise connection, that the kind of 24-hour connection that we're available and dispersed. I often raise this question with students. I ask them in environmental psychology, and I ask the reader in the book, "Where are you now?" And people will say, "Well, I'm here. I'm in Manchester or in Leeds, and I'm at this particular sort of location. I'm at the university. I'm in this building." And I say, "Well, yes, that's true, but you also have a virtual presence. You exist on many platforms in many forms. You know, you might have all sorts of avatars. You might have a Facebook account, an Instagram account, and you exist almost in an omnipresent way. And it gives us this sense of, I think, almost being dispersed. And in terms of living in the real world, what we call the real world, and the gap between the real world and the virtual world, and the universe and the metaverse, seems to be becoming ever more difficult and to differentiate. They seem to become ever more intertwined. And I think that's worrying, challenging. And I certainly note when it comes to our technology, that we are becoming increasingly not just users of technology, but fusers with technology. Our technology is becoming increasingly sort of integrated. While I was writing the chapter on the sort of the digital age, Elon Musk did his first Neuralink experiment, and he's looking to sort of connect our brains, our nervous systems with computer hardware. And this raises, I think, fascinating and troubling questions. And we're talking about sort of nature and human nature. And, we end up talking about transhumanism, a post-human future. And this is something that I look to in the book as well. And I question towards the end. So from users of technology to fusers with technology. The image here is quite interesting as well. This is Minda. She, I don't know why I'm using the word she. It is a artificial intelligence robot, cyborg, in Kyoto, Japan, in one of the Buddhist temples there. And she, or it, is, see how difficult it is to slip into. that how quickly we anthropomorphize and start to relate to our technology. And that I actually talk in the book a little bit about the differing attitudes, fascinating differences between the way Westerners generally respond to technology and relate to technology versus the way sort of the Japanese in particular respond to technology. I mean, I can't imagine seeing an artificial intelligence sort of a robotic vicar in a C of E church or a Catholic church even. But here we have Mindar who preaches, who gives sort of Buddhist teachings, um, and it's for a lot of Westerners, and it's Westerners who've been to the temple that seem more disturbed than Japanese who go. They see it as oh, it's a bit quirky. Some see it as a way to reach out to the youth, and some see it almost, to use the Buddhist term, upaya, skillful means, trying to communicate to a new generation. But I wonder, and I raise this question in the book, to what extent a machine could ever be a bodhisattva or a Buddha. They can't know anything. They can't feel compassion. You might argue they also can't feel anger or craving, but they also lack wisdom and compassion as we understand it. So it raises, I think, some interesting questions about the future of spirituality as well. Um, let's move to the next slide before I get lost in. I could get any one of these slides I could get lost in, and it could end up becoming the sort of a whole. Um, when I was thinking of illustrating this velocentricity, this obsession, fixation with speed, one of the films that I think really um, woke me up to this was quite an old film now, actually. It's called Baraka. You can watch the whole thing actually on YouTube, I think. It's quite easy to find. And it's a film really about speed, spirituality, and connection. And it moves from natural sort of landscapes to the built environment to the technological age and the digital age as it was in 92. They made a follow-up film years later called Samsara, which appropriately named, the cyclic sort of endless realm of dukkha, of suffering, of maya, of illusion. But I still think Baraka is the most beautiful sort of expression of this, and I think it expresses through film in a very kind of poetic way. It's sort of like a visual meditation on the subject of speed and alienation and disconnection and connection. I also love the fact that the film starts with a very beautiful Japanese macaque monkey bathing in the hot springs of Hokkaido in the north, because these are some of my favorite monkeys. Mustn't talk too much about monkeys. Let's move on. It's another favorite topic. So part of the book, as Romy was saying at the beginning, sort of ancestral threads. I love that title. It should maybe the title of my next book, Ancestral Threads, looking to different wisdom traditions. So I begin by looking through this Hindu cosmological lens of the Kali Yuga, and then I look at other spiritual traditions as well. Someone that I keep looking to is Eric Fromm, Having and Being, and in his works, one of his works, he talks about looking to the masters of living, who are from these different wisdom traditions. So I kind of paraphrase that and say, let's look for the masters of slow living. We consult the wisdom traditions for effective antidotes to acceleration. That on one hand, these teachings have survived for so long because they are both timeless and they seem ever timely. They seem to resonate with us. They seem more relevant now than ever. And I think a big part of uh, the crisis today, this age of anxiety, is something. in relation to a quest for deeper meaning and purpose and connectivity. And I know my colleague, Dr. Steve Taylor, has written a lot about this need for connection and reconnection. Um, and so the traditions that I look to are the ones that I've been sort of particularly immersed in over the years, the Hindu, the Buddhist, Taoist, and the Jewish. So the psychology of slow living is very much a cross-cultural and transpersonal psychological approach. And the reason I do this is to make it more of a deep-rooted practice. So it's not just a quick fix. How to do slow living in 5 easy steps. It's trying to really sort of prepare the ground for an authentic cultivation, a re-envisioning, a re-enchantment. Now, Lee was saying at the beginning, take some time to get your tea ready. And I like to think this is a book that people will read with a cup of tea and hopefully some calming music playing in the background. Buddhism is certainly a tradition that I've spent many years sort of studying. I was very recently at the Buddha's birthday and awakening celebration at a local Chinese temple in Manchester, Fo Guangshan. And one of the things I love about that temple is they do really beautiful tea ceremonies. And that was probably one of the first places that I was introduced to the tea ceremony. The Chinese tea ceremony is a lot more relaxed than the Japanese tea ceremony. I think it's probably a little less formal. Um, and I noticed that just the process of drinking tea could quite effortlessly elicit this feeling of relaxation, of focus, of mindfulness. Just the process, really, of slowing down. And this got me fascinated in slowing down and preparing tea, because that's essentially what the tea ceremony is. It's making tea slower. And at the time I was doing this, I was also working as a drama therapist, a psychodramatist trainee in the NHS with Glossop and Guybridge. It was NHS Pennine Care at the time. And I was very interested in drama and ritual and theatricality and just what happens when we slow down. And I noticed in an earlier paper, a paper that had far too much alliteration in the title. It was called what's it called? A Tantalizing Taste of the Timeless Transcendent. And it was all about the tea, which sounds horribly pretentious now I say that. But it was all about the tea ceremony and using it with enhanced care service users in the NHS. And I noticed, and the other therapists noticed that when we slowed the process down, even making tea in the traditional English way, your milk, your sugar, stirring, just slowing down gives it this ritual character. It becomes semiotically charged, full of meaning, significance. And I became really fascinated with this and with tea in general and the tea ceremony. And I note several times in the book and in different promotions that when it comes to the process of mindfulness, and any activity can become a mindfulness activity, and the secret but not the shortcut is slowing down. And it's in that slowing down that we taste more. We rediscover taste, as we said earlier. And there's a few expressions here that I absolutely love. One was from the Chinese Buddhist tradition, cha chan yi wei. Tea and Zen are of one taste. That means when we drink it with that Zen mind, that tea mind, we drink it with full attention, that it is a meditation. The term Chan, Zen, is related to that Buddhist term jhana, which is a deep state of meditative absorption. And we see that in the tea ritual. And it's something you can try for yourself next time you have a cup of tea. Just slow the whole process down and notice what happens. Because it takes something everyday and ordinary, maybe mundane, and elevates it, re-enchants it. And that's this Japanese expression that's often used in the tea ceremony. I just came back from Japan and I was very proud of myself because I recognized the calligraphy in this matcha tea room, Ichigo Ichie, one time, one meeting. The idea that this moment will never be repeated. This cup of tea will never taste the same as any other cup. Every moment, every encounter that we have is unique, is special. And I find that a very sort of beautiful, very deep and meaningful teaching, Ichigo, Ichie, one time, one meeting. And I think it's the process of slowing down that allows us to recognize these meetings, to truly encounter them. So the chapter on Buddhism talks a little bit about the tea ceremony, about mindfulness, and also about the speed of thought. What is the speed of thought? And looks to certain Buddhist teachings on that, because as I said, mindfulness is largely about slowing down. I know you've had teachings before in this conference. I think it was last year or the year before. You've had some on Taoism. Taoism's the an indigenous spiritual tradition of China. It's a religion, it's a philosophy, it's cultivation practices, it's dietetics, it's lots of different things. I sort of tend to define it as this idea of recovering the harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity, a return to simplicity and authenticity, and recognizing the natural world as a guide. One of my favorite Taoist books isn't Lao Tzu or Zhuangzi, sort of the big famous ones, or even Liezi. It's Liu Yiming's book, Awakening to the Tao. It's a beautiful translation by Thomas Cleary. And one of the things I love about it is that it takes nature as the guide, nature as the teacher. So Liu Yiming is out in the woods and he notices there's been a strong winds and hurricanes, and the trees with shallow roots haven't survived. And so, what do I learn about longevity? What do I learn about health? What do I learn about resilience? You need deep roots. And everywhere he looks, whether it's the water or the clouds or different animals, the Tao is imparting these lessons that nature itself is the guide. Nature itself is the template, the example. And I look to other examples later in the book. I sort of make these connections between Taoism and deep ecology and eco-psychology, and show how there's a huge overlap between sort of the Taoist worldview and the worldview of deep ecologists and eco-psychologists, and often environmentalists as well. And I make these connections. It's also a state of mind as well, and a way of listening. I really like the work of Theodore Roszak, particularly his Voice of the Earth. And to me, Liu Yiming is demonstrating how to hear, how to tune in to the voice of the earth. But it's difficult because there's a lot of background noise and static and distractions. Or as I say in the book, we don't just live in the age of distractions, we have distractions to distract us from our distractions. So it all gets a bit meta and messy. But this idea of returning to the sort of a natural state, an authentic state, is one of the gifts I think that Taoism gifts us with. So I look to the Taoist traditions for ways to recover and rediscover, to align ourselves with that pace of nature, rather than the more pathological pace that we seem to be running at. So looking at these principles of Wu Wei, effortlessness, and Zhuran, nature, naturalness, these are absolute core principles and practices in Taoism. I very briefly mentioned, because it's not a how-to book, I very briefly mentioned Qigong, and don't think I mentioned Tai Chi. Tai Chi arguably is a more modern practice. But these are wonderful ways of embodying this kind of slow living. If I were to do a how-to book afterwards or an accompaniment, I would probably talk a little bit more about Qigong and Tai Chi. I briefly mention it. But since we're chatting here, I think the actual practice of this can be seen in some of these inner martial arts, and particularly Qigong and Tai Chi, the sort of slow movements, finding the stillness in the movement in particular. So it's a very the still point. The still point is a very beautiful term. I won't get lost in that though. I think looking at the time, I think I need to move on as well. I conclude the seventh chapter. It was quite deliberate. It was the seventh chapter. It's the seventh day. I think it's one of the first times I've actually written about Judaism. Usually I write about sort of the Eastern traditions that I've studied, because I've probably been studying those and been immersed in those for longer than, I was raised in the Jewish tradition. And I think when I was 15, 16, I became very sort of spiritually curious and started wandering into Buddhism and Taoism and Hinduism. But I sort of return to my sort of ancestral roots for this last chapter. And it struck me that the Sabbath itself is such a wonderful example of slowing down, that there is a point in the week, and it's almost like Hindu cosmology. It's cyclical. It returns every week to the Sabbath. And the idea that in the Jewish tradition, rest is divinely ordained, that it's an imitation of the divine, that the divine rests, so you rest. And so this idea of imitating the divine, I think, is quite powerful. And this then led me to thinking about what happened when we stopped during COVID. What were the two obsessions? What did people run to? Whether it was this feeling of needing to connect or to do something. Most people ran to baking and gardening. And I look to sort of particularly the image of the garden and the image of Eden as a place of rest, a place of refuge, a place of reconnection. And I look at the Edenic encounter. I look at Kabbalistic sources, Jewish mystical sources that link to the Sabbath, that link to this idea of the paradise, Eden. The roots of that word, paradise, it's a loan word actually from the Persian. So it probably overlaps with Zoroastrian religion as well. I didn't actually go into the links between Zoroastrianism and Judaism. There's quite a few, but that's probably another tale for another time. But this idea, this ideal of Eden, that finds itself expressed in so many other traditions, and so many, it's an archetype. It's an archetypal place. We find it in the realms of the immortals, Kunlun and Penglai in Taoism. We find it in the Pure Lands of the Buddhists. We find it in the realms of the gods, and we find it in Judaism and Christianity and in Islam as well. The idea and the ideal of Eden and the Edenic encounter. So I talk about this in this final chapter, and I kind of return to From as well, This final quote: "The reason why the Sabbath has so central a place within Jewish law lies in the fact that the Sabbath is the expression of the central idea of Judaism, the idea of freedom, the idea of complete harmony between man and nature, man and man, the idea of the anticipation of the messianic time, man's defeat of time, sadness, and death." So as you can see, this takes us far beyond the sort of more popular idea of just slow living, slow food. This gets to kind of almost the metaphysical foundations, the spiritual roots, following those ancestral threads. I've used that too many times. Thank you, Robbie. Um, Back to our source, back to the Satya Yuga, the golden age of truth, of connection with the divine, connection with ourselves, and connection with the natural world around us. I think that's just about right for the time. And oh, I don't know if that discount code even works. Or you can try it, I suppose, if you're interested. If you're interested in the book, why not have a little plug? I think it's a 20% discount code. But I've noticed Routledge keep doing sort of sales and stuff, or you might try and find it on Amazon or eBay, second hand or third hand. I don't have any copies left anymore. So that's I'm sorry, I got one copy left because I had to sort of lots of people helped me write it. There's lots of people in the acknowledgements, and they all had to get a complimentary copy. Um, but the principles itself, so just sort of looking at this idea of reconnecting, consulting these wisdom traditions for effective antidotes to acceleration, rediscovering these timeless and timely teachings and finding. So it's one of the reasons that I've chosen different wisdom traditions, is that hopefully there'll be something there that resonates, something there that connects. These are all quite different traditions. They have some elements that they share, some bits that are perennial or archetypal, but they're all quite different expressions. And so it's almost like looking at different sort of sides of a diamond, different bits that are reflected back, that hopefully there'll be something in there that you find that resonates. Find your own path to slow living, your own path to mindfulness, your own path to the back to the Satya Yuga, your own golden age. I think that's probably come up to. I've gone a little bit over, haven't I? I think
Not
there was
at all. Not at all. Beautiful. Thank you ever so much, Elliot. That was charming and insightful, and I can totally recommend that book. Do go and have a look and peruse the pages. There is such wisdom and beauty within it. I hope you're good for some questions, because we've certainly got some questions bubbling in the background, Elliot.
Oh, right, yeah, lovely.
Smashing. So I'll pass over to Philip.
Thank you so much, Lee. And the first question actually is from your. I'm not going chronologically, but this question I think very well opens up to other questions. And it brings back, it goes, is the age of darkness required to bring us back to the light of a spiritual, meaningful life?
Oh, that is a good question.
So,
Um, you know, the age, the different yugas, they follow a divine pattern, and you might say have a divine purpose. And perhaps it's also using that sort of the Taoist idea of yin yang, this idea of knowing through contrast. And also, this idea of in Judaism, the Kabbalistic tradition, this is idea of machoshech la'or, from darkness to light. It's only in those times of darkness that we look to the light, that this need is kind of rekindled within us. So yeah, perhaps it's this age that necessitates. This is the turning point. This is the almost like almost like a critical mass of all the craziness that is happening. Maybe it's even the birth pangs of many sort of many will say, particularly if we look at eschatology in the Jewish tradition, Christian and Islamic tradition, that it's the birth pangs before redemption, that things inevitably get worse before they get better. Um, I'm trying to remember the name of the film. Was it The Day the Earth Stood Still? I haven't seen the original one, but I saw the one with Keanu Reeves playing the alien, who's going to destroy humanity to save the world.
Yeah.
And he meets this great scientist, really well played by John Cleese. I didn't know he could act that well. He plays this Nobel-winning scientist who convinces Klaatu, I think it's the name of the alien, that we're messing up the Earth, but we're on a threshold, and this is the point. This is the tipping point that we need to make that change. We need to wake up to this. So I think this idea of the wake up call, this idea that the age of darkness necessitates a quest to find the light. And if you look at sort of the Hindu writings on the Kali Yuga or the Buddhist writings of the age of darkness, the decline of Dharma, almost all traditions agree that we're living in some sort of dark age or some kind of approaching end times. Even the environmentalists agree that we're living in very kind of precarious sort of in terms of looming ecological disaster as well. That this is really a kind of a call to wake up. So I think there's definitely some wisdom to that.
Thank you, Elliot. Part of the question was sort of to do with what you're saying about transhumanism. It's almost feeling like at the moment there is this, as technology is advancing and it seems to be becoming more for those that can afford, shall we
Mm,
say. And I think it seems to be shifting in that direction. The technology, if you have the finances, if you have the money, if you have the wealth, there is all sorts of possible technological opportunities and possibilities for you. And yet, I think at the same time, in what you were saying, there was a sense of tension with that, almost a pushing away from that. I dare even say the word revulsion towards that. And I wonder if we're sort of, it, it's almost like there's two cultures beginning to split. I think perhaps, is it a rejection of that transhumanism and that technological advancement, and as you were saying, the hermit, the push and
mm.
the call for people to move in that direction versus this sense of this embracing and everything is to be technological, to have the chip in your head and the car that flies out of your garage, etc., etc.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's almost inevitable, that tension. And I think for many, particularly those who sort of look to the wisdom traditions, I think they will be particularly wary of sort of the pace of change and sort of the integration with technology, the fusing with technology. And I think sort of there's a lot of people calling for um, some kind of moratorium or some kind of stopping or thinking, the fears around AI, for instance,
Mm.
generative AI and its deployment in sort of all sorts of areas of our life, like the dominance of the algorithm. I sometimes tell students, I'm aware you have ChatGPT and all these other sort of options, all these essentially cheat options for your essays, but I'd put it this way: how much longer are we going to have to actually enjoy thinking for ourselves, thinking our own thoughts, being creative, expressing our humanity? At what point is do we risk kind of outsourcing this to technology? And what are we going to lose as a result of that? I said, the fact is, if this keeps progressing, if you keep sort of using generative AI to write your essays, then there's two ways we could go. We could go to sort of to handwritten essays, sort of like a step back, or are we going to end up with using AI to mark those AI generated essays? In which case, none of us need to be here, and the whole thing becomes kind of redundant. And I think one of the most interesting writers, thinkers that I encountered when I was looking at the digital age was the environmental thinker and scientist James Lovelock. One of his last books, which I think is probably one of his least read books. People know about sort of the Gaia hypothesis and some of the other ones, the Revenge of Gaia and other ones like that. But his last book, The Nova Scene, is looking at, he's almost like given up on humanity and thinks, well, maybe technology will find a solution. But it's this idea that technology will almost inevitably render us obsolete or surplus, at which point we'll kind of just be back in the garden anyway, and we'll force to be encounter ourselves anew, in terms of many things that we do for work. Are we still going to need to do those? We'll need to find purpose. We'll need to rediscover purpose. And I think that may inevitably lead us back to some of these wisdom traditions and the search for purpose, the existential, the spiritual, the teleological. So I think Lovelock raises some very interesting questions. He's surprisingly optimistic actually about the technology, I think he'd probably at that point of his life he'd given up on people actually doing what they needed to do. But I think that tension between technology, of being users of technology as a tool, and to what extent we become fused with it or become the tools ourselves. And one of the things that I raise in there actually is looking at this idea of Taoism and rediscovering the pace of nature. Well, we are actually currently changing the pace of nature. I look at this idea of the changing of the seasons, that spring seems to be getting shorter and earlier and may eventually disappear. I kind of play a little bit on the title of Rachel Carson's famous book, Silent Spring, and say, we might actually be the generation that finally silences spring. Likewise, this idea of Richard Louv writes about the last child in the woods. Are we going to have the first child in the machine? So it's some of these questions. Some of this is kind of some of the book is kind of a dialogue with these thinkers. Carson in particular is very interesting as someone who was one of the pioneers of the environmentalist movement. Such an important thinker.
Thank you. Insightfully put, Elliot. Thank you.
We have a wonderful question from Romy, and I think this brings a bit back in the conversation, but nevertheless, I think it's a beautiful question. It starts with soul fragmentation, and maybe shadows enable us to feel the depth of being.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe when we were talking about the darkness, and I said maybe shadows and the darkness enable us to feel the depth of our being, where the light is expanding, but the depth is actually going deeper. So we have to almost go deeper into that darkness in order to bring it out. So it's almost looking at things in a different shape. And I wondered, when you were talking earlier about the slowing down, and all I kept thinking about was the appreciation, and how if there's a correlation, which I think there is, but if there's a correlation between slow living and actually gratitude and appreciation for.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I think so. I think so. Very much so. I mean, just if you think of like the six perfections of Buddhism, which includes sort of like that patience and that gratitude, and these are very much kind of a product, kind of both the roots and the fruits of mindful practice. But I really like what you say about the shadow as well. I've just been for a completely unrelated paper. Well, they're all kind of related. I've been reading quite a lot of rereading, in many cases, a lot of Jung, rereading because I didn't understand it the first time round quite often. It's like when you're reading Jung, you've got to translate, oh, this is a Greek term, this is a Latin term, and I was like, he knows what it means, but and okay, this is from alchemy and this is from somewhere else. But this idea of the shadow, I think, is absolutely fascinating. That for Jung, you have to go. It's the first part of the work in individuation. It's the shadow work, and what we leave behind, or what we neglect, or what we rush ahead of, or what we spiritually bypass, to use that wonderful term. That's I think also part of slow living as well. And I think this is kind of almost like the return of the repressed. A lot of the trauma, a lot of the anxiety and depression, I think, is a consequence of this unsustainable speed. And that when we do slow down, we have that necessary encounter with the shadow. And as Jung said, the shadow isn't just the neglected, despised, sort of hidden, repressed. It's also the source of inspiration very often, and partly the need for its integration. So I think there's a kind of alchemy through slow living that takes place. A kind of as the Taoists might call it, an inner alchemy, a neidan, an inner alchemy, through which we learn to reconnect not just with ecology, with others, or ourselves, but those parts of ourselves that perhaps we have neglected, or ignored. And very often that includes the spiritual, the soul, aspect of ourself, of our psyche.
It feels as if in that slow living, you're walking in yourself,
Mm.
rather than walking ahead of yourself.
Mm. Or running from
Or
ourselves.
running from
Yeah.
ourselves. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I noticed, I mentioned this to our students a few months ago, just as an observation of myself, that like in the mornings, I was very aware that I was doing everything very quickly, literally making a cup of tea.
Mm.
And I was walking at speed from one side of the kitchen, and I've got a very small kitchen, but from one side of the kitchen across to the other, opening the door with such vigor, opening the cupboard door, getting out the cup, not just switching on the kettle, but just knocking the switch down. And everything was very staccato and quick. And I suddenly stopped because I felt the tension in my body, and I felt the anxiety in my stomach and my chest. And I thought, stop. Everything's okay. Everything's okay. And as soon as I said that, I started breathing and then making the cup of tea slower. And I became, that whole day, I became really aware of just moving that bit slower in my day, because I realized that I'd been spending so much time in a state of anxiety as a background noise. And that actually this all started in COVID as a background noise. And I mentioned it to my brother today about, in the beginning, we were having updates, daily updates every hour. And I said, how profound is that? Every hour having updates, news updates on the television, and being indoors having that and not being able to go outdoors, the anxiety. And we've not actually done anything to slow ourselves down since then. We've actually
No.
ended up speeding up after that?
Yes, we have. I actually note exactly that. That after
Mm.
COVID, we just didn't just carry on. We got faster. We accelerated further,
Yeah,
and I don't think we've even begun to process the kind of the collective trauma
yeah.
of what was happening then, and what that did. Um, but I
Oh,
think it's going to inevitably we're going to have to face that. We're
yeah.
going to have to face that shadow at some point.
I mean,
Um,
one of the things I just wanted to mention, because I don't want to hog you, I mean, if anyone else wants to speak, but one of the things I wanted to mention was about the ritual, and actually
mm,
the ritual being a link with slow living, and in
mm,
particular when you were talking about like food, and actually three things in particular. One is Sunday trading. So now we don't have a day of rest,
mm,
and how impactful that has been on society in the West. The next one is actually the way shopping has changed, the way
oh yeah.
supermarkets have changed. So now it's all that, most of it is that you actually have to do all the work yourself. So there's now not the patience of lining up in a queue and
Mm,
having the opportunity to talk to people along the way, but now it's that you actually self-serve. So you're doing all the work yourself and everyone's waiting behind you. And there's that speed and acceleration. And also the third thing is funerals, and how there's been such a huge surge towards people having um, quick cremations, having actually sorting it all out and paying for it themselves whilst
mm,
they're alive, so that there isn't the rich. And I know that it's, I mean, my father had it done, so I was
mm,
very, very aware of um, not being able to have that ritual. People can do it themselves. They're being told, oh, we'll take away the body and we'll do what we need to do, and
mm,
we'll give you the ashes afterwards, and you can have a ceremony or whatever it is you want at your own choosing. But this is being sold and pushed almost as if as a quick and easy way of not having the weight behind
mm,
the having to plan it yourself. There's a certain ritual that people go through when
mm,
it's left to family members to have to do that. And
mm.
I'm wondering if there are so many of these threads that are being pulled together that are just adding to that speed of life.
They make some excellent points there, and I'm thinking particularly in terms of one of the things I mentioned in the book is this idea of instant gratification and how this seems to perfectly correspond to this click and collect culture, same day delivery, next day delivery, instant messaging. And I asked this question, Freud writes about the importance of being able to delay gratification, the reality principle. And I make the point that, we now, we have to contend with the virtual reality principle. And, that many things now are just a click away, a press of a button away. And how is that going to change human nature? We don't know yet. This is kind of a brave experiment or a foolhardy experiment done at a societal, global level. And I think we'll probably see the results over the next generations. I mean, it's changing everything from developmental psychology to social psychology. Um, hmm.
Thank you.
Well, listening, we have some question based on your question, Romy, but maybe let me just put a quick statement of my own in between. The more you talk, the more I'm getting curious about speed. Well, because everybody's so much presenting how amazing is slowing down, and I'm all with you. I'm just wondering, why do we have speed in the first place? I mean, it sounds like a crazy idea the longer I listen. So I really would like to hear, do you have an opinion about the value of speed? I mean, almost like desperate question here.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's say in the preface, that there are times where speed is of the essence, in terms of medical treatments or diagnosis, but many of the times where speed is of the essence is of times of emergency. And what happens when we end up living our lives constantly as a default setting in that state of emergency, in that state of what I refer to, well, it's not my term, it's hypervigilance. But we're living as if everything needs to be done at that same speed, as if everything is a matter of life and death. And I think that takes its toll, this idea of allostatic load. We run to keep up, and we don't notice, and I noticed this myself. I didn't notice the burnout until it was too late, um, because it's insidious. Because it's at a societal level, everyone's moving at this pace. Everyone seems to be doing this much, and so we don't notice it. So on one hand, I recognize there are certainly times in life where speed is valuable. It's not in and of itself sort of evil or sort of anti-human, but I do think that it becomes problematic when it becomes the default, when it becomes fetishized, and when it becomes a goal in and of itself. Um,
That leads me somehow to the next question. Maybe I did not pay enough attention, but did you talk in your book about is this disconnect going to be peaceful, or which ideas do you have how we can reduce the speed on a society level? What is your thoughts about that? Is this going to happen easy, or is this going to be a big one?
I don't think it works societally. I think necessarily, and I think again, going back to these wisdom traditions, I think it needs to begin at the individual level. And then perhaps this idea of Sangha or communities. I think there's a danger of I think one of the problems of the collective sort of top-down imposed is again sort of related to these ideas of control, of speed and efficiency. So I think one of the problems in this is that the individual gets lost. It becomes a number, a statistic, an algorithm, a part of it. So I think part of this necessitates it being a sort of more personalized, individual route. And with enough people doing it, then hopefully it can become sort of a cultural shift. But I don't think that it's something that can be imposed. And I spent a lot of time with sort of critical psychologists and Marxists and revolutionaries who tried to do it that way, and it seemed to me to be something of a dead end, and it seemed almost inevitably to lead to a kind of a nihilistic worldview, sort of a sort of perpetual antagonism against everyone and everything. We used to talk about deconstructing psychology. And it seemed at one point, I asked the question, well, isn't this just a demolition? What are we actually building or creating here? It just seems entirely contrary. And so I think there is something to be said here about the value of the individual, and sort of making this um, you know, slow living itself, I think, will take time to take root, and I think that's a necessary part of it, I think.
Because in the beginning you spoke about that chronic society, so that's why the question comes from. And I was wondering how we heal the chronic society, if it's one person at a time, or if there are tools. And Lee and Romy and many others talk about the absence of rituals. You talk about the funeral, and there are other examples. And I was wondering how these absence of rituals, like people used to believe in church, and there used to be times of the year when there was feasting and fasting, and there was times of the year. So things had a certain natural or created by us, written and things like that. And was wondering if this is part of the solution, maybe.
Well, I think absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why, right at the beginning of the book and throughout, I emphasize reconnecting with these wisdom traditions to bring into focus, to recover what it is we've lost, and to offer some tentative suggestions of how we might sort of regain, reclaim, reconnect with some of these. But I think everyone is inevitably going to have to find their own Tao, their own their own virtue, their own way into this. I don't think it's going to be a case of sort of any kind of quick fix for this. So I think that's one of the reasons why I've opted towards kind of looking to these wisdom traditions, looking to the masters of slow living, and trying to recover, rediscover some of that wisdom for our age, where it seems to be needed now more than ever.
We have another question, Romy. Maybe you would like to present it, and then after this, maybe moving forward to Lee for some final question. Maybe is that all right?
Yep, that's fine. What was my question?
I may read it to you.
Which one was it? Because I've been writing. I'm like, any idea that pops in my head, I write it down.
It's the nervous system is part of it. So
oh yes, okay. So I put about the speed when you were talking about the what is the point and the benefit of the speed, and I put down from a, and I think you covered it, Elliot, when we were talking about the survival instinct. So the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And I said it's the survival mechanism kickstarting the sympathetic nervous system, shortening our telomeres, disrupting our mitochondria, and then causing our bodies basically to have that breakdown, and then eventually for us to have burnout. But ultimately, I mean, I love history, and I remember being at school, being one of the only children that really liked the Industrial Revolution.
Right. I talk about that in the book as well. The Industrial Revolution.
Because even now, it impacted me so greatly at 12 years old that I could feel in my bones the impact that the Industrial Revolution has had on our society, like from Britain, because that was obviously just my little world, but was how it impacted the countryside and societies and families, and it tore families apart, and it broke families apart. At that point, so many families had to travel so far away in order to get work, and how it was at that point that we actually then almost started to, it was that firing of it was basically, in my eyes, it put a fire in that furnace, and we were the kindling being thrown in to keep that fire going, and so that we can manufacture more, so we can create more, make more, produce more, but without being connected, as you said, to ourselves and to nature. And it was all something, and it was, there was beauty that came out of it. There was, so many inventions that came out of it, and so much for, sort of we went so far ahead. But I even see now the connection now with AI, because it's like the Industrial Revolution then, we did not have the wisdom to know the impact that it was going to have, and the lasting impact, even to this day, I believe. And I feel the same about AI. Everything is traveling so fast with the social media as well, and the children, the connect. We have not got that. We haven't learned from the Industrial Revolution how impactful that was,
Mm.
And now we're in the same position. It's almost as if we've been given the same lesson to go, okay, have you learnt anything? And we've gone, no, we haven't.
Well,
So I sort of see it acting out as well in the world today. So
mm.
I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I think there was something fascinating around the time of the Industrial Revolution in terms of um, if you look at the artistic and poetic traditions that are emerging around that time, we've got the Romantic movement of Wordsworth and Blake, and we have the Transcendentalists in America, Ralph Waldo Emerson and others, um, who are writing about, Blake, dark satanic mills, and Emerson, and books like Walden, a sort of Cabin in the Woods, which are kind of all about recapturing what is essential, what is natural. At the same time of these changes, and I think each time this happens, the questions about artificial intelligence will lead us to questioning what intelligence is.
Yeah.
What is the nature of mind? What is soul? What is spirit? It will, I think, inevitably lead to kind of parallel movements and counter movements, and I think it's a an interesting time
Mhm.
to live in.
It's definitely put it feels definitely as if there is that stretch, and that we're all being stretched into the light and the darkness. It's almost
Mm.
as if we're both going in directions, horrors, sort of. Yeah, it's like I just see it as if we're going right up to the sky, but we're
Mm.
also going right down to the depths of the planet. So
Mm.
it's almost having that and holding that tension within ourselves as
Yeah.
much as anything else.
And I think the idea of slow living is, that might be inevitable, but at least we can do it consciously and conscientiously.
Mm, yeah.
Thank you, Elliot. It is
Thank
a
you.
personal pleasure to listen to you. I really do hope there is a follow-up practical workbook. I certainly would be buying it. I am one of those people that has left academia because of getting close to burnout. I am still in that process of putting life together and recovering. And I think the life that I am trying to create is a simpler, slower life, one in which where I can be more profoundly connected to the process of life itself, to be involved in living life. So thank you very much for this. I think this is really timely and important work. And I'd ask everybody if you could unmute your microphones and put our hands together and give a really warm thank you to Elliot for this presentation tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I'll keep in touch. If you put Elliot Cohen Leeds in any search engine, you'll find me. I'm all over. I'm all over the internet like a rash. So keep in touch. If you're interested in the conference, the Transpersonal Psychology Conference, do come along. It's a lovely sort of intimate gathering, and I'll be presenting a new paper on spirituality in Nepal, actually. So that'll be a fun one. Uh, well, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you
Uh,
very much.
take care. Keep in touch.
Will
Thank
do.
you.
Thank you.